Thank you and good morning, everybody, and welcome to Just Ask Julia. My name is Liz Helton, and I will be walking us through today's presentation on structuring your professional experience section on your resume. As always, Just Ask Julia is our way to provide tips, tricks, and insight. There we go, to help you up level your job search and your career navigation in general. So let's dive into it. I love talking about resumes so much. And when we talk about them, we typically talk about them from a broad sense. And so I wanted to start sprinkling in sessions for Just Ask Julia that focus on each piece of your resume individually. And so I thought we would kick it off by talking about the professional experience section, which of course is the meat and potatoes of your resume. It is where most of the information lives, right? It is typically the first thing we think about, the first thing we stress over when we start pulling together data and insight and thinking about what should go into a resume. We think about the professional experience. Now, the biggest mistake people make is they look at it as an archive, right? This is a bunch of stuff that I have done throughout my career. Well, we want to shift, right? We want to really be thinking about this as a marketing asset, right? Your job with your resume, and you're going to hear me say this probably a couple times through today and forevermore. And if you've been with us in the past, you've heard me say it then too. Your resume is not about you, which is a weird thing to say because as we talk today, we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff that you've done. Your resume is a tool designed to showcase how you are the right person for the job you are applying to. Now, as somebody who has a history in marketing and PR, that is the first thing that we think about is audience, right? So we are writing towards something, right? Now, when we think about the life cycle of our resume, a lot of people say, well, you only have like 6 seconds to impress. You hear every career coach, resume writer, hiring decision maker, that 6 second impress stat is something you hear a lot about. And what I will also tell you is that there's a big old asterisk next to that is because there is a life cycle that your professional experience gets used for, right? Yes, that first 6 second scan is going to be a quick decision, right? But as you get into the process, there's going to be a closer read, right? Once you get that first cut, hiring managers are going to be looking for bullets, right? Looking for the information that they need to understand who you are, right? In the interview and in reflection of the interview, they're also looking back at that and saying, okay, they said something about this in the conversation. Where is that represented? I want to learn more about it. So your professional experience is really meant to be served throughout every stage of this, right? And so if we're only writing for that application piece, that 6 second read, we're missing a huge part of the story. And we're going to get into how we make sure to maximize each of these segments throughout our session today. Really honing in on the fact we are not looking in the rear view. I really often say, like, you've got to be forward looking, right? Every single bullet needs to be looking at how is this important to what we're going after. The best litmus test you can use in your professional experience is to say, is the person reading this going to care? Is the person reading this going to have something to think about for this role? Is this going to help prove that you are the right person for the job? So it is really easy to just explicitly look in the rearview mirror and say, what have I done? This is a brain dump, a big like pile of just accomplishments and things that I have done in the past. But instead, we need to be saying, how do those accomplishments align? And when we talk about that, a lot of times we talk about it through our summary statement, our career highlights, that branding and positioning that we put up top. But it really starts right here in these bullets, right? Because this is the section that's going to get the most attention. So how do we break it out? Well, 80% of your resume, of your professional experience in any given entry, 80% of it should be about impact and accomplishment and outcome. So many times when I'm looking at a resume for the first time, I see kind of a series of job descriptions. And it's more a responsible for, right? And and you know, listing what the duties were, right? That should only account for about 20% of each entry. The other 80% needs to be focused on your accomplishment and your impact. Now, we're going to get to that 80% in just a minute, but to start, when we're writing a scope statement, we want to put in, we want to kind of take a leap, right? We want to make sure that we are noting the level of contributor, right? Really clarifying where you sat within the organization. Sometimes title is not an effective indicator for what your level of responsibility is. Time and time again, I work with individuals who say, like, I had a manager title, but I was really working at a director level, right? A director title. And I reported directly to the CEO. This was very much so an executive role and function. You can explain that in your scope statement, right? You want to put an emphasis on the areas of focus, right? You want to talk about, 2 to 3 things that the role's centered on, right? What was your big mission? The arena in industry is important. Context is important. Now, sometimes on resumes, I will see entire statements that focus just on what the company did. And honestly, it's kind of a waste of real estate, right? A couple of words shrunken down to be able to just give some context about what the company is fine. We don't need to spend 2 or 3 lines on your resume talking about what the company was, the size of the company. You can put that into your scope statement, right? To show to give that context about the industry and the sector that you are in. Parameters around the team size, budget, geography, timeline, scale, all of this is going to help paint a picture. Now, if we look at our before and after examples, sometimes what we will see is we just worked on this project to redesign customer onboarding experience. Okay, solid, but we can take that to the next level, right? Owned the onboarding strategy for a 40-person B2B SaaS product team, managing a 500K roadmap across 3 cross-functional squads. That paints a bit more of a picture in terms of the size, the scope, putting an emphasis on what their role was within the project, right? So when we think about scope, think leap, and you're going to be okay. As we start to think about what to include in your resume, there's different things that we can be thinking about, right? I like to think about 6 different lenses, right? That every role should consider. Now, not every role is going to have these things, but as you are thinking about what to include, I want you to think through these categories. First is growth, right? Companies really care about 1 and 2. These are like the 2 most important things, growth and efficiency. How are you making money or saving money, right? Innovation, right? Something was built or launched or improved. Something didn't exist and now it is there, right? What was created? People leadership. This is one that honestly gets put as a footnote way more often than it should, especially as you grow into more managerial and executive roles, thinking about how you operate with the people around you, hiring, training, mentoring, managing, influencing, are all really important. Problem solving, right? What was fixed, right? This kind of harks back to the efficiency category, right? A risk you prevented. I've worked with a lot of like governance risk in professionals that come to me and say, Liz, my whole job is to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. And that is a story in itself, right? So what did you build that innovation category to prevent something from happening? The problem solving, right? The putting things in place, right? Recognition or quality, right? Awards, satisfaction scores, promotions, ratings. How are you being acknowledged? Think through all of these different elements as you are looking back at your experience, and we want to showcase how your accomplishments are aligned in these categories based on what you're going to do moving forward. Now, your mission with your professional experience is going to change throughout your career. What you need to put in your individual contributor resume is much different than your mid-management, than your executive level, right? When you're an individual contributor, oftentimes we're focused on the execution, right? We are focused on how you are producing, right? Quality, speed, um, the difficulty of what you produced, how you kind of solve problems, right? It is about helping move the needle, right? When you're an individual contributor, you usually sit as kind of the root of the organization's tree, right? And a tree with weak roots is going to topple over. Now, as we move through the organization and we move into mid-management, you start to focus more on people, right? Because in mid-management, you are really serving as that conduit, right? Between the roots and that executive team, right? Between those individual contributors and the executive team that's going to be more focused on strategy. So really shifting from just what you did to how you led the mission, right? How your team became mission accomplished. We start thinking through a little bit more about people and process, right? And then, of course, when we get into that executive strategy, it's more about like the ideation and the strategy and really putting like strategic outcomes into place and thinking through how, the organization as a whole succeeded as a result. Now, getting into the specific bullets, how do we write a bullet? Oftentimes, when we're telling a story, it is really easy for us to say, I did this thing, and as a result, this happened, right? We tell the story, and then we get to the happily ever after, right? That's natural storytelling for most of us. When we write for resumes, we want to flip it. And we use what's called the XYZ formula. And it's a formula that was popularized by Google. I want to say about, I want to say 2019 was when we first really started hearing Google talk about this. And then it became popularized amongst recruiters, decision makers, resume writers, career coaches. The XYZ formula is the best way to really flip the script and showcase accomplishment first. So instead of saying, I did this and this and this and this happened, we say, this happened because I did this and this and this. And what that does is it flips and puts the powerhouse move right up front, right? So we call it accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. And if we break it down, if we think about, okay, I want to show something through the lens of growth, right? What was the thing that you did? Well, the accomplishment was growing the regional pipeline, right? That is the thing that somebody sitting on the other side of the desk is going to want to say here when they want to know, like, can you do this job? Are you capable of doing this job? Well, yes, I grew this regional pipeline by 40% quarter over quarter is the measurement. And then the strategy. How'd you do it? Right? Like if you want to know more about this, here's how that happened. And if we put that all together, we get regional pipeline 45% quarter over quarter by launching targeted outbound campaigns and expanding partner referrals. That gets right up front the piece that's going to be most important. This is a really easy flip. If you have a resume where you feel like I've got a lot of great accomplishments in here and they're feeling really buried, try flipping around to where your accomplishments are. It does take some getting used to start writing with that accomplishment first because it feels like we're like giving away the ending right up front from a storytelling perspective. But from a resume perspective, we don't read the same way. We are scanning and looking through the resume, trying to find those outcomes. Let's make it as easy as possible to find those outcomes. A lot of people will stop me and say, Liz, I don't have numbers. My role is to like make sure that things don't happen. So I don't have those like growth numbers. That's okay. I always look at to quantify or to qualify, right? So when you are looking at your success, if the number is the most important thing, let's find the number that is going to help prove it, right? So revenue percentage, time or cost saved, head count, right? If that is the number that is going to prove scale, let's use it. But sometimes it isn't it isn't as tangible, right? Um, if you can be describing that you built something, right? That it was the first to market, that it was the first time the company's tried something, that's okay too. So it's not always about a number. Sometimes qualifying your expertise is just as powerful as quantifying it. All right, so I want to show a couple different ways to kind of put it all together, and we're going to talk about different different focuses that tend to pop up, right? So first and foremost, right, if we look at just the general structure, we have your scope statement right up front, right? Here's that one we built together. And then if we look at our bullets, we're going to see every bullet is focused on something so specific that this is the only person that can claim it. That's a great litmus test, quite frankly. If you are trying to say, hey, is this bullet specific enough? If you feel like the person in that role, in your role, could have said it before you came in, or the person after you leave could say the same thing, it's probably scope, right? If it is something so general that anybody who has ever had that role or will ever have that role could say the exact same thing, that is scope. Our bullets need to be focused on how you applied that role and that responsibility. Right. So if we look at our bullets, each of these are focused on outcome first. And we can see each of them are focused a little bit on a different lens, but accomplished X is measured by Y by doing Z. And so that is the formula and the structure that's going to really help you to distinguish between impact or description and impact. This is also important because it gives context. You don't have to keep repeating it or separating it, or separating it into bullets and then have all of your bullets be a jumbled combination of scope and impact, right? If we put the scope statement right up here, that lets you get into how you were successful in that mission. Now, as we look through the different types of tenures, okay, I've seen individuals who have been at the same company for really long periods of time. I've seen individuals that have had one title for 20 years, right? Or individuals that have really short tenures. There is a way to tell that story, right? A couple things to consider. In the case that we're showing right now, this is an individual who has had a couple different titles throughout their tenure, right? But those titles more or less are, really a natural progression, right? So a director to a senior director. We want to show that progression. We want to show promotion that shows that you are good at what you're doing, but we don't need to split those out into two different roles, right? We can put those two roles together. We can give some context around two promotions, took on expanded ownership. What did that role really look like, right? In that context statement. And then we can come into those bullets. Now, I do want to draw attention to that I popped in some keywords here, right? This is another great way to draw attention to help the reader navigate your resume so they don't have to really dig to learn how to figure out what to work for. Separately, popping in these key terms like this is a great strategy for the applicant tracking systems and making sure that you are keyword optimizing so that you're speaking directly to that job description. Right? Our job is as much as possible to speak to the language of the job description. So if you see operational efficiency, team growth, cost management in that job description, we need to know that those bullets are going to focus on those areas. this is a great way to help the robot that reads your resume, as well as the humans that are trying to scan it very quickly, find what they're looking for, right? Another strategy, if you've been with the same company and you need to figure out how to talk about something that where the role did change. So you went from a client success manager to a director of enterprise accounts. Those are two very distinct roles, right? That's when you're going to want to really split them out and treat them as their own thing. You can have the company name right up here, and then within each, put your different titles with the dates, your scope, and then your bullets. So if the work is changing, it earns its own section. Okay. Now, sometimes you've had one title for an extended period of time. Adding like 15 bullets to one section is really challenging and is going to make it completely unreadable for the individual that's reading it. Now, if you're in a role for a good length of time, even just the 3 years that I'm noting here, that's enough time to see some transformation, that maybe your title didn't change, but the scope of your work has evolved, or you have multiple layers that are going into your role. What you can do is you can kind of categorize them. I this is almost kind of a hybrid approach to a functional versus a chronological resume. I don't do like functional resumes because they end up being terrible to read in online applications, hard to like put together where things happen. They're just not it's an ironic term because they're very rarely are they actually functional. We like the chronological because it lets you put some context into where things happened, right? And then, but in here, you can break out, excuse me, you can break out your successes by category, right? So that you can look at a lump of successes for product implementation and delivery, and then a lump of successes for client relations and revenue growth, right? You know where to look depending on where the conversation or where the evaluation is going. Short term or short tenures scare people a lot. There's a lot of self-consciousness around them. A lot of times we think like this is gonna make it look like I jump from job to job. Um, in today's hiring market, it's not uncommon to have somebody in a role for a year and a half, right? It's it is not uncommon for layoffs to happen. You know, it is it's more accepted than it had previously been, right? So looking at shorter tenures, less is a liability and more is focusing on how do you even just focus, like showcase that you mission accomplished, right? So when we look at a short tenure, so in this case, I'm really thinking of something that is going to be like less than a year, right? Maybe there was something that you do want to still say about that time. Name the mission. What were you brought in to do? Show how you completed it, right? The date math is less important, right? So don't necessarily put January 2025 to like February 2026, put 2025 to 2026. If it's January 2025 to October 2025, just put 2025, right? If somebody needs more, they will ask you for more. Um, in that case, you just put it and we take a mindset that there is more to say here than just that date, right? I am of the philosophy of months aren't always the most important thing because they will tell a story that is more reading between lines than it needs to on your resume. As an example, I had a client a couple years ago that came to me and said, let's look at my resume. And the first thing I noticed, because she kept the months in her resume, is that she stuck around for about 12 to 18 months. And then there was no break in the month between company A and company B. She consistently, no break in the month, 18 months, no break, 18 months, no break. And I was like, oh, you job hop. Like you're for sure, this is not because of a layoff. You are immediately going from one role to the next. And honestly, props. Like she knew how to earn that paycheck. She knew how to network. She knew how to find jobs. Also, she mission accomplished with every single one of those roles. But that story was getting missed, right? So, looking at a short tenure, if you're just focusing on the date, you're going to end up missing the story altogether. On the other side of the coin, though, if that short tenure is showing that it just didn't work out, sometimes it just doesn't work out. Sometimes it doesn't end up being a good fit, whether it's for the company or for you, and you part ways fairly quickly after you start, and that it's not a story you want to tell. If it's not a story you want to tell, don't. Just take it off. I guarantee you that a short tenure is at this point where we are in the market, it's not going to be the limiting factor. It's about really showing what is the story that you need to be telling, right? If it's your most recent role, you can be putting it up to present, assuming that you're still working there, and that's okay. With the palette that we have right now for job seekers is that it's a little bit more understood that we can look at the menu, right? That we can be applying for jobs even if it has been less than a year. So short tenures don't stress me out as much as they did even just 5 years ago. It's about really showing how you mission accomplish. And if you aren't showing that, really think through, is this a necessary entry to put on your resume? I would say that at least once a month, I'm telling somebody, like, we don't need to talk about that role on your resume. It's not a huge part of your story. It's not moving the needle. It's not moving your story forward, and it's not going to create some giant gap or question mark in your application. Granted, it is a lot easier for me to say, let's just because it's not my story. Really, really remember that the resume is it's not a CV, right? Right? A resume is to summarize, and CV or curriculum vitae is course of life, right? We are focusing on a resume that is meant to just be, what do you need to know about me for this job? Cut the short tenure if you don't need it. Okay, non-linear, right? So let's talk about non-linear backgrounds. People who are jacks of all trades. Um, Looking at how you thread the needle between these roles and how it connects to your future role is the most important thing. When you have a non-linear background, I actually look at it as a great way to be able to say, look, we've got a lot more fodder to choose from, right? We have more legs to stretch. We can really be intentional in what we're showing for each role. My ultimate goal when I'm looking at somebody who has a really diverse background is to say, okay, what did that teach you, right? So for somebody that has gone from being a high school teacher to a program manager to a UX researcher, right? All of those roles are going to connect to a product manager role in different ways, right? But the summary, the sum, right, of those roles is going to be is going to be really intentional, right? So that high school teacher role, right, is, you know, building curriculum. It's, using real time date, like you've got a real set of data in front of you with students, right? Having to like pivot and understand what's working, what's not working, what do they need to learn more of, right? That's a lot of data right there. When you move into something like a program manager, the cross-functional coordination and stakeholder alignment at big scale, is going to be huge for a product manager, for a researcher, right? It's translating pain points directly into product decisions, right? Looking at how each of those stories aligns for what you're targeting is going to be the trick. Because if this person just put as their high school teacher a role that they, you know, taught students and helped basketball teams, or like served as like the PE teacher, like that's not going to translate through. But if you can figure out how to speak the language of the job, and we're going to talk about that in a second, and really showcase how to connect the dots between what you've done in each of those roles to what you want to do, that's what's going to matter. Okay. Rewriting the bullet for what you want. I see this a lot in what I call like clients that have different lanes that they want to go in. One of my favorite examples of this was a client who had been in shipping and logistics for a really long time and said to me, Liz, in my next iteration, I either want to stay in shipping and logistics, or I want to do more in the like nonprofit space that I have been so like passionate about volunteering in, or I might go teach. Those are three wildly different resumes, right? I do love that future versions of this individual had him doing some consulting for shipping and logistics, had him doing more board type and volunteerism work for nonprofits and substitute teaching, which I love that fairy tale ending that they really wanted to paint a picture of themselves. In a more general sense, what we work with clients on a more day-to-day basis is someone that's saying, I've really liked sales, but I really want to get more into the post-sale experience, right? So sales versus customer success, two different resumes. Now, you still are working with the same data, your same experience. We need to figure out how to showcase those things differently. So in a sales role, a success bullet might look like closing 1.2 million in expansion revenue across 40 enterprise accounts by identifying upsell opportunities during quarterly business reviews, right? So it's leading with that revenue number. In a role more focused on the relationship aspect, it's about the retention and saying, retaining 40 enterprise accounts at a 98% renewal rate, right? So it's focusing more on that aspect that they're going to care about. It's the same project, right? It's the same idea, but it's flipping the script on saying what's going to be important, right? Oh, it's a combination of being able to speak to the job you're going for and knowing like what is it that you really need to know here. A lot of people will just say, well, if I move the bullets around, that's going to be enough. This is taking it that even a step further and saying, how are we speaking the language of our audience? So that's going to be it for us today. My hope for you with your professional experience is to be really focused on outcome, right? At the very least, if you take nothing else away from this today, is that you are focusing on that scope statement and your XYZ formula, and then really focusing on your audience. From there, you're going to be able to move into the other sections of summarizing in that introduction, building out the additional experience. We're going to get into all of that more in the future. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liz Helton. Just Ask Julia takes place the first Friday of every month, with a couple of exceptions for those holiday months. You can find more about it at our website, careertransformationpartners.com. If you're watching us live today, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our presentation. And if you are checking us out on YouTube, you can find the link in the show notes to sign up for future sessions. Thank you so much.